Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Verne Harnish, who's the founder of the world-renowned Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, and chaired for 15 years EO's premier CEO program, The Birthing of Giants, held at MIT. Founder and CEO of Gazelles, a global executive education and coaching company with hundreds of partners on 6 continents, Verne has spent more than 30 years educating entrepreneurial teams. The growth guy, syndicated columnist, he is also a regular columnist for Fortune magazine. He's the author of Scaling Up, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, and along with the editors of Fortune, authored The Greatest Business Decisions of All Time, for which Jim Collins wrote the foreword. Verne chairs the annual growth summits in North America, Europe, and Asia, and continues to teach in the MIT-based executive program he founded. So nice to have you here, Verne.
Diane, glad to be on the show.
Well, we got to meet quickly at the Genius Network, but I didn't really get a chance to talk to you. So I'm looking forward to this.
I am too. That is always a fun event. Joe really does a great job.
He does. And all the people there are just amazing speakers, and definitely found it worthwhile. And, I was looking up some information on you before my interview with you, because I'm always like to do more research. And I found an introduction done by Jeff Hazlett, which would really crack me up. He really introduced you. And I love Jeff because I'm on the C-suite radio. But he got so excited in his introduction to you, and I could see why. You're an interesting guy.
Well, and that was a crazy speech. I was more scared for that presentation than any I've ever been in my life, because that was in front of several thousand of my peers. That was the National Speakers Association, and
right.
I was the opening keynote for their Money Day, and Jeff was the host, and I was so nervous. Get at your peers.
Yeah, peers are always the worst, aren't they?
We knocked it out of the park, and I'll be heading up kind of their $1 million roundtable. I and Shep Hyken are going to be leading that this year at the NSA conference.
Well, that's a really great group of people. I'm part of NSA, and I know Jeff really well, and I found all the stuff that you were talking about there, and also on I found a webcast or some kind of a webinar you did. I know you have, post so many things online, but I learned a lot from you, and I want to ask you a bunch of questions based on all the stuff I was reading, because I've taught more than 1,000 business courses. And when I listen to you, I'm thinking, wow, I wish this guy could be in my courses. I was fascinated by how you say we need to own words. And you said how, you are, known by certain words, the growth guy, for example. But so you said people don't search by those terms. And I'm curious what you mean by we need to own our terms, and how do we choose our words? How do we pick those words?
Well, that is the essence, Diane, of brand. Mm-hmm. And my wife gave birth to our first son, Cameron, 21 years ago. She absolutely wanted us to get the safest automobile.
Yeah.
And bought a Volvo. There was no question. Today, I've got a great driving machine, which is a BMW. And they've taken those two words and driven all of their design and messaging and strategy around owning those. In fact, you can go out and book a driving experience. Google owns the word, besides Google, search. And
right.
They took it from Yahoo, and Yahoo never recovered, Diane. They never could reposition themselves in your mind. And the idea of the two words is very simple. To me, the most important strategy question ever, at least popularized by Harvard Clayton Christensen, the big strategist there, is what is the job your product or service is ultimately doing for the customer? In Volvo, it's keep us safe. For Google, it's to search. Tim Ferriss, made it big by owning two words, 4 Hour, the late Stephen Covey, seven Habits. And most people and their companies never get around to owning that clearly a word or two in the minds of enough of the market to really establish brand. And the reason you want brand then is it gives you unbelievable pricing power, and which raises revenue, and it reduces your marketing costs. And so your margins are a lot thicker, which is why it's important. Now, what I mentioned is I own the Growth Guide.
Mm-hmm.
You know you own a word or two is if you search it.
Right.
In the world, because it is geo-specific. You might just be the best family Italian restaurant in San Antonio. And that's great. And folks in San Antonio will search that. And if I'm in Austin, I'm not going to find you necessarily. Mm-hmm. So it is geo-specific. But in my case, anywhere in the world I put in the Growth Guide, I pop high, if not at the top. But it doesn't matter because nobody searches for it. As I was joking around with Jeff, when's the last time somebody sat around and said, I'm looking for a growth guy, unless it was Viagra related. That's not really my deal. So I went out, and a friend of mine who I'm literally writing about at this moment, I mentioned to you, I'm re-editing Scaling Up today. And he runs one of the top SEM, search engine marketing firms in the world for high-end organizations. And he can optimize 150 million keywords. And so I had his help, and we figured out the 2 words that we do want to own. And I can let you know now because we've gotten the trademarks back on it.
Yeah.
And really inspired by Eric Ries. Eric has done something amazing with this whole lean startup idea. In fact, the term lean startup is searched more than the term startup, which is that's a huge success. And so we clearly are in the scale-up space. We think scale-ups now are the hot thing versus startups. Everyone's kind of making that pivot, realizing we have plenty of startups. What we need is more scale-ups. And I own Scaling Up. I was able to kind of snatch that away from Professor Sutton at Stanford. So if you put in Scaling Up anywhere around the world, but it's not as searched as much as the term scale-up. But you can't own scale-up any more than anyone can own automobile. So I had to figure out a word to put in front of it, like Eric put lean in front of startup. Settled on the term agile. And so we really see companies pivoting from being a lean startup to an agile scale-up. And that is the title of what's going to be my new book, The Agile Scale-Up. And we hope then we can make it as popular as lean startup. And like I said, I can say it now because we've nailed down the registered marks for those 2 words.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, fascinating how you came up with that, because right now I was dealing with my book title since I'm writing about curiosity. And then you pull up the Mars rover stuff if you start, the Mars curiosity. So how do you pick a word that's not been overused, or, you know what I mean?
Or you get about owning it. We were talking last night with a friend of mine, Robert Cialdini, owns the term influence.
Right.
He's the kind of the father of that. Jeff Sutherland, the term Scrum.
Right. Fascinate.
Yeah, it is better if you can put, I think, a word in front of it. But one of the things I want to share with your audience is a lot of us that are in the service business, what's more important is to brand our unique way of delivering on our service. And even because real differentiation occurs at the level of activity. It's how you go about the business. Southwest Airlines goes about the airline industry radically different than all the other airlines. And so I want to come back to my buddy at Gauss and Neumann with this SEM. There's a search engine marketing firm on practically every corner on the planet. But he decided to take a unique kind of physics analytics approach to SEM. And rather than optimizing 150 or 1,500 or 150,000, they optimized 150 million keywords. And he had a tough way of describing that. And so, long story short, we coined a term mask marketing instead of mass marketing, MASK, which stands for massive array of structured keywords. And he's created an entire new category within the SEM space. And because he created the category, he owns it. And it gives him a nice way then to brand. Hey, what do you guys do? We do mask marketing instead of mass marketing. Rackspace did the same thing with their fanatical support. Sapient had this unique approach to designing software that utilized a process called QUAD, Q-U-A-D. And so I really encourage, particularly service firms. Product companies name everything. Service firms fail to, and that is a fatal mistake.
It's interesting to just look at branding and all the challenges. And when you talk about scaling, I worked with Bruce Rogers at Forbes when I created a brand publishing course when I was the MBA program chair at the Forbes School of Business. And what we found when we were talking to all these CMOs with their biggest frustration, other than trying to figure out all the providers and how they can all talk to one another, was how to get messages out, but to do it at scale. You know what I mean? Like to reach your customers in a very personalized way, but scaling up. I mean, I'm sure that's what you deal with on a daily basis. Do you hear that as the biggest issue?
Well, it is. And that's why it's critical that you, as David Meerman Scott says, you are what you publish. And so once you know your word or two, the first thing that Alberto and his team created was a white paper called Mask versus Mass Marketing. And because people want to be educated, not sold. It's a little bit like Joe Polish's buyer's guide that he created for the carpet cleaning industry. And he then had my wife create a buyer's guide for her olive oil business. She's fed up with the really crappy olive oil that's been dumped on the American public. And she wants to educate them on what really is quality, healthy olive oil, of which 99% of the Americans have never even tasted, let alone experienced. So he brought over a top olive oil that's won every taste award you can imagine. And we were just doing a fun tasting with a group of EO members in Philadelphia last Friday. And it really opened up their eyes. But we then worked with Joe to put together a buyer's guide so that, again, she doesn't want to sell, she wants to educate. But through that education, she's able to get the word out about her olive oil and in general, great olive oils that people might be able to purchase. So it's an education process, not a sales process.
Well, when you talk about all the different things, and when we're talking about sales and just reaching customers with our products, I've taught a lot of marketing courses where we talk about the P's, and now you talk about the E's of marketing, which I thought that was really fascinating. But when you talk about price of a product, you say that a lot of us just basically give away our products when we should be charging more. How do you know if you're pricing properly and if we're giving it away?
Well, part of it's to test it. And you're right. We spend so much time on the cost side of our business, Diane. And don't get me wrong, we need to watch costs, but I really prefer to push that down to some of the other people in my organization. What I need to spend more time is on the price side. And the reason it's hard to get price right is we're dealing with these irrational beings called humans. And that's what Richard Thaler got his Nobel Prize a few months ago in behavioral economics, because he proved us human beings are not rational. And so pricing is critical. And the only way for you to know is to test it. You look at Amazon, and not that I don't look at my book 10 times a day and see how it's doing, but that price of that book changes regularly. It's varied from $15 and change to $21 and change just over the last few weeks. And that's because Amazon really understands how to monitor demand and then throttle price accordingly. And the poor, regular retailers competing with Amazon stick a sticker on their item and don't change it until they have to discount it. And it puts them at a tremendous disadvantage. Side note, I've got a good friend, Larry Gilbert's company, Event Networks. We've helped them scale 10X. They manage the retail stores for kind of tourist attractions, things like museums and aquariums, where they're really good at what they do, but not the retail side. So Larry manages that. He's the biggest now in North America and Europe. And one of the things he went out to do is said, all right, store managers, take your 10 best-selling items and let's raise the price 10% every week until we see demand fall off. And he got Diane to 80%.
Wow.
cases. Now, he didn't go raise prices 80%, but he realized the amount of money he was leaving on the table. One last example, B2B. So I was back at a reunion of this MIT program that I founded and still get to teach in. And one of the students, CEOs, had a product that was mission critical to large companies, solved a major problem that they face. And it was a SaaS it was a software offering that was about $30,000, and he couldn't sell one of them. So he finally went out himself and talked to some customers and said, look, you got a big problem. They're like, yes, we seem to have an elegant solution. They go, we agree. So why aren't you buying my software? And they said, because it's only $30,000. We don't have a problem. We've got budgeted 10x to solve. And we don't trust that you can solve it for that little money, and or that you'll be here at that price in order to support it. And he went back and 10x'd the price, literally, to $300,000, and he can hardly now support them as fast as they're selling this solution. And so in general, because most entrepreneurs felt they had to give it away to get into business, they never lost that habit. And so we really do recommend that people begin to study up on pricing, particularly Herman Simon's book, Confessions of a Pricing Man or Guru. I can't remember which word he used, but pricing's critical.
Yeah, it really is. I've talked to Ford Six a lot about this because he's always getting mad at me for giving away stuff too much. And I'm wondering if we'll see more Uber surging like pricing, like you said, Amazon's doing. You think that that's the future, that we'll see them tying more into what the demand is?
Yeah, one of the most egalitarian companies on the planet moved to demand-based pricing, and that's Disney. There is no more ticket price. They realize that we need to use pricing to regulate the flow through the parks so that people have a better experience. It doesn't do any good if too many people are there anyway.
Wow, that's interesting.
In Herman Simon's book, my favorite case study is the London Olympics.
Yeah, I wanted to hear about that.
Yeah, Rio was absolutely a bust to the tune of about $2 billion. We had to bail him out. I don't think we have numbers yet out of South Korea, but London generated more revenue than the 3 previous Olympics combined.
Wow.
Again, more revenue than the 3 previous Olympics combined, and they were fairly well run. And one of the big differences was pricing. They had an interesting thing. They had what was called price your age. So if you were between 0 and 18, if your parents wanted to bring you and you were only 4, you only had to pay £4. You didn't have to pay 50, which was, the typical tier. You got a child price, adult price, and then the senior price. Mm-hmm. Side note, I don't know why we discount seniors. They have all the money. We ought to be discounting the poor, family members in the
right
in the middle with 27 children and taking care of their parents as well. But I digress. So they had it, unless it was one of the big events. If you're third round fencing, hey, if you're 4, you pay £4. You're 11, you're paying £11. This was seen as very fair. Yet no 4 and 11-year-old's going to go without their parents, who are still paying the £100 for an adult ticket, but psychologically they didn't care because essentially their children got to come for free. Yet the average price would be over £50 a seat for some minor event that was like a ghost town in Rio, but absolutely packed in London. And so all kinds of organizations are understanding the importance, including business to business, the importance of offering variable pricing based on demand.
Well, that's fascinating, and I'm still thinking on the Disney thing that I remember when they had the e-tickets. So this is all fascinating to me that everything's changed so much of how everybody's handling how they look at pricing. And you deal with a couple different factors. I was trying to. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I wanted to bring up another discussion you had about finding your right-hand guy or gal to drive things. I was fascinated by that discussion because I've talked to Rich Karlgaard about his work. He writes about teams and finding complementary people. We all, know that was pretty important to Steve Jobs. I want to know, how do you know if you found the right number two guy or gal, or if you are the number two kind of person? How do you get known?
Yeah, in fact, probably more important to Steve Jobs was Tim Cook. Tim was really the right guy that helped Steve scale and has continued to help scale the company after his passing. And Steve only chaired one function, that was marketing. Tim chaired everything else. And Tim made sure that 7 million iPhones were there on a Monday morning as people were standing in line, which is not easy. The execution side is what's difficult. And I have to say, generally speaking, most entrepreneurs are not, they may be good, but they're not that interested in the execution side. They want to stay really on the strategy side. And we consider marketing strategy equal strategy. And so a recommendation in finding this right number two versus all the other functions that you need to fill is this has to be somebody that you've worked with in the past. So the first thing I do is I sit an entrepreneur down and I say, let's take a piece of paper. I just did it the other day. And I want you to, let's sit here and brainstorm who are all the people that you've worked with in the past, including existing customers, suppliers, advisors, people that you interact with as part of your existing business that has shown this kind of operational excellence. And then could you convince them to come on over to your side? And it can be even a former employee who left, made it big, and wants to come back. It could be somebody that you are growing up inside the organization, but it's likely somebody you worked with at maybe a previous job, or again, customer, supplier, or someplace that you're familiar with. And then you still need to test drive them. So somebody came to me and said, yeah, but what about the Google boys? They brought on Eric Schmidt to be the CEO. I thought, I've been caught. But I went back and they smartly put Eric on the board for a year. And a year at Google is like dog years, any other company, but they still test drove their relationship with him for a year before they really moved him into that number two spot. He was number one as CEO, but it was really to help kind of groom Larry so he could then step in and be CEO as he is today at Google. So that's my strong advice. And we've got a competitor who kind of wrote a book about this and recommends going to a headhunter. And 90% of the time, that blows up in your face. Unless you can work projects with him for several months. And again, test drive the relationship. Date before you get married.
Well, that's great advice. And I think probably my most important question for you is, you're a card-carrying member of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. What's the best magic trick you can do?
I always loved the backstage illusion that was a David Copperfield standard because, you invited the audience backstage to watch you do your magic. And it's like a double cross, which is why I love it. So the backstage illusion that David Copperfield made popular.
And I have seen him and he's great. And this has been, that you really, I could watch your webinars that you give. You really have great advice. I watch a lot of people that talk a lot, but they don't really tell you how to do things. But you really give very specific advice, and I really like that. And I think a lot of people probably want to know how they could find out more about getting your new revised book and find out just more about you.
Well, so anyway, the name of the book is Scaling Up, and so it's easy. Just go to scalingup.com. There's all kinds of free resources there that you can take advantage of, including a couple of bonus chapters. You don't have to buy the book to get them. One's on how to prepare and run a strategic planning session, including a sample one-page strategic plan, one of the things that we're most famous for. And then a personal mission. We have what's called the one-page personal plan. And again, you can download it for free, and even the instructions that come out of the book are there available, no cost. The one thing I encourage folks to do is sign up for my weekly insights, no cost. But every Thursday, I put out what I hope are practical ideas like I've been sharing here, Diane, that individuals and companies can use to continue to scale up.
Well, Verne, this was so helpful and wonderful to finally talk to you a little bit more in depth. We didn't get a chance last time. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Diane, thank you for spreading the word. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And we'll be back right after this message.